I'd like to welcome you to our online presentation today with Natural Habitat Adventures. We are here to talk about Scotland's wild highlands and islands, and we have Stevie, Christie, and Malcolm O'Reilly here with us today, broadcasting live from Scotland. And I want to tell you a little bit about Stevie, and then Stevie will introduce you to Malcolm. Stevie grew up in Scotland, exploring these highlands and islands. He has worked as a guide and is the coordinator for the Scotland program for Natural Habitat Adventures. And we're very lucky to have him here today to share his knowledge and also all of his beautiful images that he has for us to virtually transport us to Scotland. So, Stevie, welcome.
Hi, welcome, and welcome to Scotland, everybody. I'm not here on my own today. I am sitting next to our head guide here in Scotland, and that's Malcolm O'Reilly. So I'll just introduce Malcolm just now, and he'll say a few words about himself.
Hi folks, pleased to meet you. It's fantastic to know we've got so many folks listening to us across the pond. My name's Malcolm. I grew up in the south of the UK, and I've lived in Scotland and worked as a guide since I left university in 1996. So I spend a lot of my time teaching skiing, kayaking, canoeing, mountain biking, and seeking out some of the country's wonderful wildlife. So it's a great place to be.
Great. So just before I tell you what the presentation is about today, I should say you're already learning, which is great. You're learning how to cope with the Scottish accent. So hopefully by the end of this presentation, you'll be ready to visit Scotland and understand what the locals are saying, which is quite important. So what we're going to talk about today are some of the key species of wildlife that you might see in Scotland. We'll talk a little bit about some of the best places to see that wildlife. We'll also mention conservation in Scotland and how that's affecting the wildlife here. And then finally, we'll talk about why watching wildlife in Scotland is very different to being on safari, but why it's much better. So first of all, we'll just talk about some of the key species of wildlife in Scotland. And we do have a very wide range of animals in here. We've got sea mammals, we've got land mammals, lots of different bird species. So perhaps I'll just ask Malcolm, when you're with our natural habitat groups, what are some of the key species that we look for, and maybe share a few thoughts about them?
Mm-hmm. Well, some of the real iconic, maybe it's an overused word, but some of the iconic species in Britain are things like red deer, which is actually the second largest deer species in Europe that we have. There are very good numbers of them throughout the Highlands, and one of the best things about them is when you come across a herd of red deer in amongst the forest, perhaps we have some beautiful ancient pine forest, but also these big empty remote glens and hillsides as well, and they're a wonderful thing to come across in the middle of nowhere. Very, very atmospheric. And one of the things I also love about guiding in the Highlands is many of the place names, the hill names of the places we visit have animal names as part of the translation. So hopefully I'll get to teach you some Gaelic as well as we travel. But one of the things that Britain's absolutely world famous for, and particularly Scotland, is its seabird colonies. So we take some fantastic boat trips during this journey to some of the most significant, for example, gannet colonies in the world, at least in the Northern Hemisphere as well. So out on the Western Isles, we visit hopefully the gannet colony on St Kilda. We need a weather window to get out there, and it's an absolutely mind-blowing experience. I went there for the first time with NatHab last year, and it was just a spectacular experience. Gannets were following the boats right the way across the crossing. And they're a spectacular seabird that just dives headfirst into the sea in search of fish from a big height. One of the Gaelic names translates as arrowhead, which I just love that. Another species that a lot of folks are really keen to see, for example, would be, we've got a list here, it's as long as my arm, it's hard to know where to start. We have some fantastic birds of prey as well. Some of the islands we visit, between them, hold a quarter of Europe's golden eagle population. So we had one fly literally just over our heads, so a 6-foot wingspan golden eagle on the island of Mull with Nat Hab last year. So there's lots of prizes in store.
Great. I might just jump back to that map of Scotland, because that's maybe quite useful if people haven't been to Scotland. So most people would fly into Edinburgh or Glasgow, which are in the southern part of Scotland here. We call this part the Central Belt. Now those two cities are actually only 1 hour apart, just to give you an idea of scale. Scotland is quite a small place, but it's also a place that really sort of surprises you because it's got such a diverse landscape within the country. You have the southern part is quite rolling, small hills. The central part between Glasgow and Edinburgh is really quite plain almost. But then you get into the Highlands, so it's basically anything north of Glasgow and Edinburgh, and we have this very different range of mountains, so quite jagged mountains on the west, rolling glaciated mountains further east, and then up in the north lots of wild moorlands. And really you only have to drive 30 minutes in Scotland and the scenery changes really quite differently. Usually, like I say, we come into Glasgow, Edinburgh, and then moving over to the west coast is a great place to come. First of all, it's very classic Highland scenery. You probably are driving past landscapes you've seen on movies, for example. Then moving up to some of the islands, the Isle of Skye and the Western Isles. Very strong cultural aspects there. Coming back onto the mainland, you have Inverness, the capital of the Highlands. That makes it sound like a big city, but its population's about 40,000, I think, which by American standards makes it a very small town. But it's the main city in the Highlands. And then that's also close to Scotland's main whisky region, which is always always good fun. And coincidentally, that's where Malcolm and I are sitting at the moment, but we haven't touched any of the good stuff yet. So maybe just talking a little bit more, getting back onto the wildlife. This landscape here is that you're looking at now is from Cairngorm National Park, and that's a great place to see many different species of wildlife. I guess some of those species, Malcolm, could include the Scottish crossbill, the pine marten, perhaps?
Yeah, absolutely. We hope you will get a chance to. I'm thinking how to summarise what we hope to see on this trip, and really the species list and the habitats we visit are, and I'm not exaggerating, they're some of the rarest and most precious and threatened habitats and species we have in the British Isles. And some of the species we should see on this trip are unique worldwide to the British Isles. So, I think something we're becoming more and more proud of is, Britain's quite obviously a small island, but it gives it a huge amount of variety for its size, and that's reflected in its landscape, its wildlife, and its culture. So one of those species is the Scottish crossbill. They can be quite elusive, but it's a wonderful little finch with a crossed over bill, and they feed uniquely on Scots pine seeds in the cones. And as an example, another species would be, for example, red squirrel. Now you'll probably notice that the British Isles isn't famous for huge animals, but what we lack in size we make up for in quality, I would say. And red squirrel, many wildlife watchers come north of the border to look for red squirrel, and they're a very charming little thing with a big fluffy tail, and it's like having a squirrel nutkin in every tree. They're fantastic.
Now the landscape you're hopefully seeing now is we've obviously moved over to the west. We're next to the ocean, and this is actually one of the islands in the Western Isles, the Outer Hebrides, and that again you can see already a very different landscape from the Cairngorms National Park. Now this island here, Harris, is actually often it's tipped as being the next national park in Scotland, which would be, in my opinion, an excellent choice because it really is such a rich source of many different types of wildlife and a very strong cultural place to visit as well. And I guess once again, you obviously expect more of a coastal influence when you visit this part of the world, Malcolm. What kind of species would you look out for when you're over here?
Absolutely. The last time I visited the Western Isles with some clients, we had fantastic views of sea eagle, and sea eagle is one of my favorites. I would say humbly that they rival your bald eagle for impressiveness. Their Gallic name translates as the eagle with the sunlit eye, Helera sulagrin. So you can practice pronouncing that one. Yeah, we have sea eagles flying over our heads out in the Western Isles, but it's also a famous place for cetaceans. So if you're a whale or a dolphin fan, then some of, well, many species have been recorded there. Blue whale, occasionally killer whale is not infrequent, and common dolphin and Risso's dolphin, to name but a few.
Great, and there's wonderful bird life in these islands as well. That's equally impressive, isn't it?
Absolutely. So I mentioned St Kilda earlier on, but I think one of the key standout things for me about the Western Isles is that the farming and the landscape there, when you arrive there, it's as if you're traveling back in time in the UK. You know, a lot of farming and landscape in the UK used to be like the Western Isles, and it's not now. But the Western Isles, because it's so traditional, it supports species like corncrake, which is a fantastic little member of the rail family. It's a bird that's very well camouflaged, and it sounds like a comb being scraped, a bit like this. It's quite irritating.
Okay, that's cool. And there's another of our most iconic birds. This
Fantastic.
is the puffin.
Yeah. In Iceland, they eat these. We're not doing that this time around. You'll be pleased to know. But puffins are wonderful. Again, many folks will make a beeline for the Scottish Highlands and Islands to visit puffin colonies, and we stand a really good chance of getting quite close to puffin during some of the boat trips and landing on some of the islands as well. At the time of year that we go, they're just starting their breeding seasons. They have these wonderful bright coloured bills, and they're referred to as the clowns of the sea. They're absolutely charming, engaging little things.
I guess in terms of their size, I'm just looking at...
That's about life size.
Yeah, probably if you've got a reasonable screen on your laptop or PC, then the size you're looking at is, yeah, it's pretty much as you see them. So you do need to be fairly close to really appreciate their character, but you can definitely do that.
They live underground just to make life interesting.
This takes us back into the Cairngorms here, and maybe just one thing that would be worth speaking about just now is just some conservation in Scotland. I'm sure everyone listening will know that John Muir would be the father of the national park system in the US. You may not know that he was from Scotland. He emigrated to the US when he was 11. And one of the ironic things about that was that Scotland didn't get any national parks until 10 years ago when we got our first two. Now what we like to say as Scots is that we kind of gave the rest of the world the idea, then sat back and watched for 100 years to figure out what worked and what didn't, and now we're beginning to protect some of our landscapes in national parks. So on this trip we'll pass briefly through the Loch Lomond National Park, and then we'll spend some time in the Cairngorm National Park, which is the largest national park not just in Scotland but in the United Kingdom. We do also have various other protected zones within Scotland. So there are various wildlife reserves, some owned by the Royal Society for the Protection of Birds. And then there's various conservational charities. John Muir Trust is one that's set up in his name, and that protects various wild landscapes across the Highlands, including Ben Nevis, our highest mountain. And we'll pass through some of those landscapes as we explore Scotland. And then another organisation which is quite prevalent at the moment is one called Trees for Life, and what they're trying to do is establish or re-establish wildlife corridors across Scotland by re-establishing some of the pine forests. So it's going to be an interesting time in the future as wildlife across the world, I guess, is threatened by its habitat being destroyed. We are fortunate in Scotland that the wildlife has generally adapted to the landscape that we have in the Highlands, but we still have to look after that and protect that. We've jumped a little bit back to the west here. I think what we're looking at here, it's a fairly typical island scene, yeah. And I think it's what I found interesting about this image was really just not the fact that the scenery is particularly outstanding or that it's full of wildlife, because obviously it's neither, but just that it's a very typical Highland scene. You can see there's no people. That's quite common. A lot of the places we visit, a nice little white sand beach, and then the little whitewashed croft houses. And to me, when I look at this image, I can almost hear the birds tweeting, and I can feel the breeze in my face, and really sort of feel, I guess, the tranquility of life in these locations. And I think that's quite an important aspect of anyone coming to Scotland. You are here to see wildlife, of course you are, but when you're in Scotland, you can't really help avoiding finding out a little bit more about the culture and about the history and the landscape. And that sort of moves us on to, I guess, point 4 of the presentation, which is why wildlife watching in Scotland is not like being on safari, but in fact, in our humble opinion, it's better. So one of the reasons we talked about that and wanted to put this point in was that, as Malcolm referred to earlier, we don't have megafauna in Scotland. We don't have huge charismatic species that you can sit back and just watch from the comfort of a Land Rover or Land Cruiser. You kind of have to put in a little bit of effort. You have to get out and explore the landscape a little bit. You want to step out onto the moor, onto the trail, onto the beach, and that's when things start to happen and when you start to see things. And one of the things that I always enjoy about that is simply by going into these places, you find yourself connecting with the landscape, and you may go to a beach like this, hoping to see otter, for example, but then you might end up being distracted by all the wild flowers that you find on the shoreline, and that introduces just a different characteristic to the experience.
Perhaps, if I may, I'll just interject for a second. I guess to get the best out of exploring the Highlands and Islands, because some of the places we visit, we have the privilege of visiting, are quite inhospitable in some weather conditions. If you're prepared to get out on foot, you really, as Stevie says, you really do get the best of it. The road network in the Highlands is, should we say, it can be direct in some places, but to get to some of the beautiful little corners, as Stevie says, you need to maybe do a little bit of legwork to get there. We're being both qualified guides, uppermost in our minds when we're leading folks is to take folks to the best places, but in the safest possible way, and the most scenic way if we can as well. So, for example, on the Western Isles last year, we found a beautiful beach, a huge big sandy beach at Tre Uig on the west side of the Isle of Lewis, and it's an enormous big beach and a lagoon at low tide, and we had a sea eagle fly over our head carrying a dead rabbit, which was fantastic, and then we're enjoying whiskey a few minutes later. But by contrast, we'll hope to explore some of the ancient pine forest in the Cairngorms as well, and see some of the special wildlife there. But as Stevie says, there's some fantastic wildflowers which we would hope to see during the trip too.
Yeah, absolutely, and it's also, I guess, an exploration of just the Scottish landscape. Now, we've looked at just a handful of images so far, but hopefully people can appreciate the diversity from the old pines of the Cairngorm National Park to some of the big wild beaches like this one over on the west coast. And what's always interesting about these wild places is that there's always the small settlements round about, the little highland villages, maybe just at a croft, a small farmhouse. And bumping into these people and the people who live in these places is often one of the most intriguing and interesting parts of being in Scotland. Out in Harris, for example, we quite often would stop by a local weaver. You've been there recently.
Absolutely. There's a wonderful guy called Donald John Mackay, and I'll maybe not divulge too much of his story, but to whet your appetite, if we can find him at home, he got a huge contract with Nike to produce, was it? It might have been a kilometre or two of the world famous Harris tweed, which is the only fabric in the world which is governed, protected by an act of parliament in its home country. So it's, we'll tell you more about that later on perhaps. But he's one of the island's real quality people, should we say, and just carrying on a centuries-old tradition.
Yeah, he's definitely an interesting guy.
Yeah.
And just one good example of, I guess, the different people you meet, and it's certainly one of the first questions we always get asked when we're guiding is people come into these empty landscapes with us and they say, what do people do for a living here?
Mm-hmm.
And it's always fun just to find out, and obviously even a step better to meet them. I'm just sort of finishing with another amazing sunset shot here, and I guess Scotland's quite far north as well. A lot of people forget this. If we were to put Scotland on a superimpose it over a map of the US, we'd be at similar latitude to Edmonton in Canada.
Hudson Bay as well. Yeah.
Hudson Bay, yeah. So we are pretty far north, but weather-wise, it's glorious. It's absolutely wonderful here,
especially that time of year. Yeah.
We do benefit from the Gulf Stream, which brings a much warmer climate than you might expect at this latitude. We do have occasional palm trees which fringe the shoreline, which always catches you off guard a little bit. But yeah, we're a maritime climate, so of course we do get rain. Not every day, certainly not every day.
You know that variety I mentioned earlier. I would add that to weather as well. You know, one minute or one day we can have glorious bright sunshine and blue skies, and then the next day it can be, you know, gale force winds and rain, frankly. And it can change just as quickly. So it's a wonderful variety, and that's why the wildlife flocks there, because the habitat is just right.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I always think of lots of different places you can go and see wildlife and wild places, and yes, some of them are very pleasant and they've got nice climates, but often, you know, the places that are most interesting, you've got to put in a little bit of work before you really feel the benefits. But one of the, I guess, the benefits to me of Scotland's maritime climate is that we do have this incredible quality of light. So for anyone that's keen on photography, sunsets like the one you're looking at just now they're fantastic. And even during the day, the sort of liquid light that we have in Scotland, we've got lots of different words for the rain because we've got so many varieties of it. We also have lots of sunshine, and really it's the combination of the sunshine and rain. As Malcolm said, you can get them, and you can have rain then sun then rain then sun 10 times in an hour.
4 seasons in one day is the phrase.
Easily, yeah. You prepare for the worst and hope for the best, and you'll always have a good time when you visit Scotland. Which I guess takes us on to the NatHab's trip in Scotland, and that starts in the capital here, Edinburgh, known as the Athens of the North. This view is taken from Calton Hill. I used to live just 10 minutes walk from this view, so quite familiar with it. But amazing place to visit. It's a UNESCO World Heritage Site. You can just see the castle on the skyline to the right-hand side of the screen. And this, I guess the buildings you're looking at is the old part of the town. We just call it the Old Town. And it's a fascinating place. It's a great city to walk around. It's very friendly for walkers. Old cobbled streets, interesting shops, and more ghosts than you could ever possibly want. But obviously the castle and the Queen's Palace at Holyrood among some of the attractions here, but it's also wonderful for wildlife, and that's what a lot of visitors to Edinburgh actually miss, is it just half an hour away. This is a sort of another of the wonderful Edinburgh streets, but just outside of Edinburgh we have I'll get there eventually. We also have wonderful accommodation for you.
It's good night's wildlife.
Yeah, this is a view of Edinburgh Castle from your room of the hotel in Edinburgh, which is very centrally located. But close to finally, this is called Bass Rock, and this is about half an hour from Edinburgh city centre, but missed by 99%, I would say, of visitors to Edinburgh. It's one of the largest granite colonies in the world, and David Attenborough, who I'm sure you will be familiar with from the BBC, called a visit to Bass Rock one of the 10 wildlife wonders of the world, which is high praise indeed, and certainly, you know, a great place to visit.
Yeah, hopefully, I'm just commenting really, but I don't know how well the resolution shows up on your screens where you are at home, but you might see these little dots floating around the top of the Bass Rock there. Each one of those is a gannet with a 6-foot wingspan. Beautiful, bright white bird. Next picture on the screen there is a red kite, and being one of the kite family, they have a very floaty way of flying, and this is again one of our most threatened and persecuted, I'm sorry to say, one of our most persecuted birds of prey over the centuries, and they're also one of Britain's biggest success stories in terms of conservation. They were down to less than half a dozen individuals in Wales, and now they're making a comeback across the whole of the UK, and we're going to visit one of the key reintroduction sites in Scotland. They're a fantastic spectacle.
Yeah, so after spending two nights in Edinburgh, we move west to a place called Oban on the west coast, and we stop in at this wonderful red kite centre on the way across. We're then based in Oban. This is Oban here. We stay in a landmark hotel called the Caledonian, just on the waterfront there. Oban is known as the gateway to the islands, and of course we're going to visit some islands while we're there. One of the main attractions, I guess, from Oban is to go across to the island of Mull, and then the smaller island of Staffa, and that's kind of what we're looking at here. Staffa is the two images at the bottom of the slide, and the prominent geological feature of Fingal's Cave, which you may have heard of, and if you haven't heard of, you might be familiar with the piece called the Hebridean Overture by Mendelssohn, which he is said to have written having been inspired by the sound of the waves crashing into this wonderful cave on Staffa. But as well as the geological feature of that, Mull and Staffa are great for a host of wildlife, as Malcolm will explain.
Just before I do, I should probably point out it's obvious from our description that Fingal's Cave and the island of Staffa was in fact built by a giant called Fingal. So don't believe the geology textbooks. That's the truth. Anyway, yeah. So on the top right picture is Mull itself. Mull is getting a British reputation as one of the key wildlife destinations in the UK because they have a very high concentration of sea and golden eagle there, and also otter. We have one species of otter in the UK, and again, they are making a comeback through the British Isles as the habitat is improved and legal protection improves. And I've often said to clients in the past years that if I was going to design an island that would be really good for wildlife watching, Mull would come pretty close. It's got a very mountainous, extinct volcanic interior and a lovely coast road that sort of circles right next to these beautiful sea lochs. So I can't wait to get there again.
And Staffa, as well as having the cave, is also a great place to see puffins, isn't it?
Absolutely. You can honestly have puffins at your feet. I'm not sure they'll be nibbling your toes, but certainly near your feet.
So here's just a few shots of some of the species we've been talking about. Obviously the seal at the top there.
That's a mermaid on the top left there.
Some gannets diving all around, and of course the colourful beak of the puffin bottom left.
Okay, and then the next slide we've got up here is, I'm sure it won't take a genius to work out, that's a sea eagle. It's the fourth, if I remember rightly, the fourth largest eagle in the world. Adults will have a wingspan of up to 7 foot, especially a female. The full name is the white-tailed sea eagle, and you can see it just perfectly in the picture there. And they take dead fish. They take salmon that was spawned. So they're not like ospreys, which take live fish, but sea eagles will take fish or ducks from the surface. So that will be a key target species we'd like to find. The boat in the bottom left is the sea leopard, which is a fantastic purpose-built wildlife watching boat which goes out from just south of Oban. And we visit one of the biggest whirlpools in the world at the Corrie Vrecken, in amongst the islands of Jura and Scarborough. So that's another fantastic opportunity to explore there. I'm just going to try and move on to the next slide here. Okay, so next pictures, we've got, looks like possibly bottlenose dolphin, top left, and well actually the Corrie Vrecken whirlpool is centre bottom picture there. It's one of the maelstrom whirlpools with a fantastic legend and historical, kind of history behind it. And top right is the second biggest fish in the world, which we have in the UK here, which is the basking shark. We'd hope to see one of those as well. Moving on to the next slide, we're looking across towards, well, sort of south of Mull. And it's just a little snapshot of some of the coastal scenery of the island of Mull that you'll get there.
Okay, leaving Mull, we head north towards the Outer Hebrides. It's a nice drive north. We go past a very iconic castle or two before reaching the Isle of Skye, where this main image was shot. And we drive through Skye. Skye's a funny place. It's full of legend and interest, and it's great for hiking, but it's not such a big wildlife spot perhaps because it's much more populated than some of the other islands. So we don't spend a huge amount of time on Skye, but instead we jump on the ferry, which takes us over to the Isle of Harris in the Outer Hebrides, and that's a much more wildlife focused destination. And arriving there, we stay in the main town called Tarbert, which you can see in the top image here. You'll see that it's not a very big town. Population,
about 5? Oh yeah, okay, about 1,000 maybe.
Not a huge amount of people, and very spread out, and you can perhaps already see the character of the Outer Hebrides, that it's quite a rough and rugged landscape, and people have sort of eked a living here for thousands of years.
Can I just share that the hotel that we stay in, the restaurant there, has been responsible for turning me into a seafood fan over the last couple of years.
Yeah, and certainly the images of the hotel you can see below there, you'll be living in a lot more comfort than people in the Hebrides have traditionally stayed in. But the islands themselves are just glorious. So the locals call Harris God's country, and it's just a fantastic place. These big beaches, you can see the footprints perhaps on the bottom left there. 2 or 3 miles long, and usually you have them to yourselves. Apart from perhaps some of the wildlife you might be sharing them with. I mean, but it's very much it's seabirds. There's obviously the mammals in the water as well, but the wildflowers all around are a real star of the islands, and it surprises a lot of people with the vibrancy amongst them. You can see the shot of the lady here in a sea of bog cotton, but much of the other the wildflowers are incredible carpets of colour, aren't they, Malcolm?
Yeah, absolutely. At that time of year, and again, it's a farmland that has been long gone in other parts of the UK, so it's a bit like going back in time. The water's beautiful and clear, and there's a lovely saying that I've heard recently, which is that you need to enjoy Scotland's wildlife a little bit at a time. A bit like the whiskey.
Yeah, indeed. Now this boat here is the boat that takes us over to St Kilda. So you can see it's it's a very comfortable boat, to be honest.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Now St Kilda, as Malcolm mentioned earlier, it's not an easy place to reach. Now, like all great places, you've got to put in a little bit of effort to get there. St Kilda is a double UNESCO World Heritage Site, and it's just, it's Machu Picchu, I think, holds the same double status, but it's just a fascinating place to visit. If the forecast is right, we'll get there. And these are some of the sort of scenery you'll see. It's got these incredible sea stacks and high sea cliffs. Some of them are 400 meters high, I believe.
Extraordinary.
And the ancient villages. The islands were abandoned in 1930, but they're still, by human population that is, but there's still so much evidence of life and times. And the wildlife experience there, it's really unlike anything else you'll get in Scotland, arguably unlike anything else you'll get in Europe. It's just really overpowering and really feels untouched, and you get there and you feel privileged to experience it. And then we come back onto the mainland, and you're back in the peaceful island life again.
It's one of my favourite road signs in the bottom right there of we've got a caution otters crossing sign. That's not uncommon in the islands. And you're seeing a view of one of the Harris Tweed weavers' looms, which have been, well, that industry has been protected as being a centuries-old island tradition.
But of course, the islands, we talk about centuries old, and these standing stones here, they date back to 2900 BC, which makes them significantly older than the Stonehenge in England. These are called the colonies stone circle, and one of the things I love about visiting sites like this in Scotland is that we don't have any fences here. You can walk up and hug the stones if that's how you feel. But they're all in these wonderful locations and often peaceful. You know, there's not masses of tourists here and tour buses, so yeah, just a great way to experience the culture as you see the wildlife as well. And of course, the wildlife is everywhere. These are the red deer that Malcolm was talking about earlier at the start of the presentation. Common both in the Outer Hebrides but also back on the mainland. And the mainland's our next destination, the Cairngorm National Park. This is your accommodation there, a Victorian hotel, just in one of the quieter villages of the park. Lovely spot, very comfortable.
If I may, the hotel where in that village, the village prides itself as the Osprey Village. I don't know how many of you have Osprey near where you stay at home, but Osprey is another conservation success story in the UK, so we're very proud of our ospreys here. And the next slide there is showing a purpose-built hide, which again was designed to offer views, close views, of badger in the top picture and European pine marten in the bottom picture. Again, two species that have been in decline in the UK but are now finding a stronghold, a last protected habitats in the Cairngorms.
And this again, a fairly typical Cairngorm landscape, ancient pine forests and you know, quite gentle trails leading up to some of the hides and reserves. Again, more of the species that we'll be looking out for, the osprey, of course, on the top right, and the red squirrel, which is actually pretty rare in the UK. Most of the red squirrels are under threat, mainly from the grey squirrels, which came over from North America. But again, the Cairngorm National Park being a real stronghold of the red squirrel.
We've got black grouse here. We may be able to get up before breakfast at the crack of dawn and hopefully offer you the chance to find black grouse lekking. It's basically a male disco. It's a male dance where they try and impress the females and then get you back in time for a hot breakfast.
The golden eagle, of course, that's one of our most iconic species, and seen in quite a few of the locations that we visit again. But the Cairngorms, again, being a good place to see them. Now, for a lot of people, when they leave the Cairngorms, that's the end of their time in Scotland, but the wiser ones among you and those with time to spare will extend your time in Scotland to visit the Orkney Isles, which are located in the very northern coast of Scotland. We reach there by a ferry that lasts just 1 hour. But again, these islands are hugely different from mainland Scotland. They very much have their own personality. If you're from Orkney, you probably consider yourself to be Orcadian first of all, then Scottish second of all, and then British as a third step of your identity. One of the most famous features in Orkney is the Old Man of Hoy, which you see in the left-hand picture.
It's the rock, not the people.
not the person lying down, but the sea stack, which was first claimed by Sir Chris Bonington in the late 60s. But wonderful place to visit, and like I say, it's very different to the rest of Scotland. It does have standing stones, which are a different character to the ones over in Lewis, as indeed the whole landscape is different. It's more rural, it's much more influenced by the Norse and the Viking cultures, but it's a wonderful sort of tranquility that makes it such a really special place to experience and explore.
If I may just jump in with Orkney, I would suggest that Orkney has been recognised as one of the heart, if you like, of Stone Age culture in the UK. There's some fantastic archaeological digs going on right now in the summer, which we have the privilege of visiting, and we can get a personal tour by some of the archaeologists. And some of the things that are being discovered there are actually turning on their head a lot of the theories that have been held for a long time about British prehistory.
Yeah, I love visiting. I find it hard almost to put into words what it means to me. I went on my honeymoon there. That's maybe has got a lot of happy memories for me. But the location itself is just a lot of poets live here, a lot of artists live here. They're drawn by the light, the landscape. I guess this odd blend of Norse culture put on top of the Scottish culture as well. So a very special place to go, and I think that's probably what people will feel when they leave Orkney, is that they feel privileged to have visited it, and very pleased to have discovered it on their Nat Hab trip. Malcolm mentioned some of the sort of Stone Age buildings. This incredible town on the top right it's called Skara Brae, and this whole village was uncovered by a massive storm many years ago, which the village had been buried in the sand for centuries, and I think it was a man walking his dog stumbled across, which were now one of the most spectacular Stone Age villages anywhere in the world.
Predates the pyramids.
Yeah, so we'll get a chance to visit that. And again, just the landscape and the wildlife. Orkney, it's a Norse word, isn't it? It means the Seal Islands. So there's some seals down the bottom there. And it may not have reached the news in the US and Canada, but recently Orkney had a very unusual visitor when a walrus from the Arctic arrived on one of the islands and stayed there for about a week, and then went away again, and I believe was spotted in Norway on his back north. So if it's good enough for the walruses, then surely we should be able to encourage a few more people to come up and experience what the landscape has to offer.
One of the fantastic species that people were really taken with in the past was the catty face, which that's the Orcadians' name for a short-eared owl, which is a lovely owl with bright yellow eyes, and they tend to perch in broad daylight next to the roads. That's a local highlight.
And these some images, the Churchill barriers, the Italian chapel. There's lots of stories behind those, but we're not going to tell you about those just now. Much better done in person when we see you over in Scotland. And this is where your time will end if you choose to come to Orkney with us. The main town of Kirkwall with its very idyllic harbour, and then its little airstrip, which will whisk you back to Edinburgh for your connecting flight or back home.
The airstrip is longer than it looks.
Indeed it is, yeah. So that really sums up our presentation today, and we will be very, very happy to hear some questions from you. I should just say very briefly before I finish, the guides that are going to be leading you when you're over here, Malcolm, who you've been hearing from today with me, Malcolm in the middle, in there, and also next to Malcolm, John Ormiston, very experienced guide and great wildlife enthusiast, also very knowledgeable about whisky. And then Mr. Tim Francis, fascinating character who's travelled all over the world and is very much at home in Scotland, and a great ambassador for all things Scottish, and a great guide to spend some time with. So that's who's going to be looking after you if you make it across this summer or next, which we hope you do. And I think we are now ready for some questions.
Wow, thank you, gentlemen. We've got a lot of great questions here. Megan has been busy answering plenty as well, but let's jump right in. One of our most frequently asked questions is about the best time to go and what the weather will be like.
Great.
Where should we start?
Well, I think if you're coming across for wildlife, then early summertime, so that period would be May through to July, is really the best time to come to Scotland. People, I think, always come to Scotland with quite negative impressions of the weather, and I think probably on most occasions we surprise them in the right way, and it's better than expected. I said earlier, if you prepare for the worst and hope for the best, you'll go away happy. On a typical week in Scotland, you will get some rain showers, but you probably get a lot of scenes like you have in the background of this image here. So blue skies, some interesting cloud formations, and it will change throughout the week. Sunshine and showers is probably the most used phrase in a Scottish weather forecast. So thousands of people come here every year. We choose to live here, so it's definitely, I wouldn't let that put you off at all. It really makes the country what it is.
I'm hoping we're sounding genuine when we say that honestly, really honestly, you're talking to two career guides here. It's often the weather that really makes the landscape come alive in our experience. I've seen, as well as bright blue skies and sunny days, I've seen, with guests looking for wildlife, I've seen waterfalls going upwards with the strong wind, beautiful rainbows, and just fantastic. We occasionally get the northern lights. Now, at that time of year, maybe not, but at the moment, a lot of my friends are looking for the northern lights of an evening. The weather really makes it all happen. It brings it completely alive.
And I guess it's worth noting as well that if people are looking for sunshine, when we do get a sunny day, then we probably get more than you get back home, because it's daylight in May and June. It's daylight pretty much from 3 a.m. through until about 1.
Yeah.
I had a baby daughter last year, so I was up a lot of the night last summer, and it didn't get dark a lot. So certainly, wonderful landscapes, lots of light. And yeah, the weather is just an aspect of being here, but it's a positive.
Does that answer the question? Were we too poetic?
I think you did. No, I think you thoroughly answered it. Thank you. That was great, and I mean, I think it's important to remember that it doesn't have to be picture perfect blue skies in order to have an amazing experience.
It just makes you quicker on the shutter button.
That's right. Okay, the other more frequently asked question is about how physically fit a person needs to be in order to enjoy this trip. Do they need to be very active and agile?
I would say one of the strengths of the way the NatHab trip runs to the islands is that you'll have 2 guides and 2 vehicles where the group size dictates that, and that gives a lot of flexibility. So in the past, one guide can go with whoever would like to do such and such, and the other guide can deploy elsewhere with a vehicle if needed. Sometimes if we're working in a smaller group, it's actually great because it's more kind of personal attention, and one thing we love to do as guides is really match things to people's ability. For example, if you'd rather stay near the vehicle where it's sheltered and you've got a nice warm seat, that's absolutely fine. And then other times, if you're wanting a coastal walk, we can fit that in perfectly as well. This itinerary does not involve any big, steep mountain climbing. That would be a lot of effort not for the return that we're looking for. So it's generally easy coastal walks, short walks, a mile or 2, if you would like to.
Okay, and would you please remind us how long this particular trip is, and whether you feel that's enough time to see everything, or whether people should consider extending even beyond the trip and staying longer?
Okay, the itinerary as it stands is 10 days. The Orkney extension is 3 nights beyond that. Just a few things that spring to mind are that, I hope we've got across the idea of the variety on just about every level that you experience coming to Scotland, variety of history and landscape and wildlife and weather and so on. So obviously the more time you spend, the more you get to appreciate that. Something I think is quite useful for folks in the past has been if they arrive in Edinburgh, a day or 2 early, then that gives you more chance to explore the sights and sounds of Edinburgh, which is one of the few places which has dual World Heritage Site status, which I'd thoroughly recommend.
Yeah, I think I would say beyond that Malcolm and I are very lucky in the sense that we have lived here and worked here, exploring the Highlands and Islands for many years, and still we discover new places to go and new things to see. So what I would imagine for many clients is that if this is their first time in Scotland, or even if it's not their first time in Scotland, that I would agree they might benefit from an extra night or 2 in Edinburgh. And this trip's great at showing the diversity of the Highlands and Islands and the different people and places you might meet, but it will probably whet your appetite to come back another time. Scotland is like that. It really gets under your skin. It's a place that there's always somewhere new to visit, somewhere new to explore. So for most people planning this trip, my advice would be think of it as your first trip, but not your last one.
Good. That's great. Thank you. So we have a collection of questions about wildlife. So I think I'll shift gears and we'll do a little bit of exploring that topic. There's a question here about the red kite, and why it is persecuted or was persecuted. Could you give us a little bit more background on the red kite?
Okay, yeah. So the red kite is quite a large bird of prey. If you're familiar with kites, their method of hunting is quite a slow, kind of measured, loitering hunting, where they're looking for easy prey. They're not chasing things down, and because of that, gamekeepers would blame them, sometimes correctly, for taking young grouse, young game birds. But often they take carrion as well, and they might get unfairly blamed for taking young lambs, which would be completely out of their ability, but they would be looking for the afterbirth, for example, at lambing time. And frankly, we're quite, as guides, we're very interested in the history as well, the human history, and frankly, there's been a history of persecution of any bird of prey in some areas, and thankfully that's changing with the law improvements, but also as young men or young people are growing up and going back into wildlife conservation and land management, those old attitudes are changing.
Okay, thank you. What about the red deer? Are they protected, or does Scotland allow deer hunting?
Scotland certainly allows deer hunting. Excuse me, I'm just recovering from a bit of a cold. Yeah, Scotland, you've got one up on us in that you have wolves. Our last wolf was killed in the 1700s, if I remember rightly, and so that's our, and bears disappeared about then as well. Lynx were gone shortly after then. So our large predators, our top predators have, you're going to come to a landscape where it might remind you of Yellowstone in some places, but the top predators have been gone for centuries. And, we're not proud of that, and that's something that may change in the next few decades. Reintroductions are being considered. But it's because of that the red deer population has gone up. And so the Deer Commission for Scotland is a government agency which sets cull targets, and that's done sometimes for tourism, for private clients, but also estates are required to manage their deer populations.
Oh, all right, thank you. So this is a fun question. No matter what the destination, people are always concerned about pests and insects and whether that might be a challenge. And so there's a question here about whether midges are a problem. And maybe you could tell everyone a little bit about what a midge is, and then answer whether it's a problem or not.
Yeah. Well, I think that's right.
Go for it. Go for it.
Yeah, it's midges are wonderful. I like to say to clients that if you're bitten by a midge, you're actually really lucky, because I think we have 35 species of midges in Scotland, and I think only 9 species will bite humans, and it's only the females that bite. So really, the chances of getting bitten are very slim. However, it can be a problem, of course. The one thing to know about midges, you asked what they were first of all. They're very, very, very small. They're much smaller than mosquitoes, but they tend to fly in swarms. And if you're in amongst midges and they bite you, it's more like there's not like a bite like you feel with a mosquito. It's more just a general irritation. You'll find yourself rubbing your hands to get them off your hands. And for most people, as soon as they step indoors and the midges aren't there, there's no reaction at all. However, I think it's important to say that the midges are very, they can't handle the Scottish weather. It's kind of worth noting that. So if it's bright sunshine, they can't handle that. If it's heavy rain, they can't handle that. If it's windy, they can't handle that. So they really, you get them most commonly on very still, very grey, overcast days. But even on those days, they're at their sort of peak early in the morning, and then at night time again, just in the evening time. And for us when we're with clients, and indeed when you come across, you're generally indoors at those times, having breakfast or having your evening meal. So you're not often out and about. If you come to Scotland on a camping trip, then you definitely want to think about midges. But generally, if you're staying in hotels, they're not such a big problem. Certainly no worse. They're not as bad as mosquitoes or black flies and things like that, in my opinion.
Yeah, I didn't have a blood transfusion once last year because of midges. That's a good thing. I'll maybe just add one little thing there that hopefully to rest people's minds, that the dates that Nat have chosen for the this trip is generally early summer, and myself and all my colleagues would agree straight away that the height of the midge season tends to be later than that. So the time that we find, when I think back to last year, I honestly cannot recall midges being a problem for any of the guests last year because it's early summer and the height of the season isn't then.
Okay, thank you. Well, I feel better knowing that. So I think we have time for one last question, and so this question is about St. Kilda and what makes it a double UNESCO heritage site.
Crumbs. Well, when you see it, hopefully we'll get to see it. It's one of those prizes, if you like. That if we get the weather window, it's 40. Remind myself, it's 40 nautical miles to the west of the Western Isles. So we travel to 2 islands just to get within shooting distance of St. Kilda. It's really the western outpost almost of the British Isles. You know, once you're on St. Kilda, if we get there, then the next stop is Newfoundland, effectively. So, you know, if we get that prize, what you'll see looks like a mountain just dropped in the sea. The World Heritage status comes partly from its human history, which stems from the fact that the human colony there, dating back to the sort of late Stone Age, probably. Yeah, think of the isolation. They had no contact with the outside world, and yeah, they're utterly isolated there with their own culture and ways of doing things. So as a study in kind of human culture and isolation, it's really fascinating. And also in terms of as people gradually discovered the islands, their effects on the locals, that's absolutely extraordinary. From the other side of the World Heritage status is for its wildlife value. And you realize that St. Kilda vies with Bass Rock on the east coast as one of the world's most significant seabird and particularly gannet colonies. So it's gannets and humans that those two status come from.
Okay, thank you. Well, this has been wonderful, and we answered almost all the questions. Those that didn't, we'll forward along to Megan for follow-up. And so now I'll turn it back over to you for any closing thoughts you might have.
Yeah, well, it's certainly, from my point of view, what I really like about this itinerary is just, like I said, the diversity of landscapes and wildlife, and also people that you'll meet on this journey. Is, I think, is a truly magnificent route through Scotland. Takes you to some places you'll have heard of, a lot of places that you won't have heard of, but you will definitely leave Scotland. But your heart may not leave Scotland. We'll definitely stay with you. It's a very special place, and if you come over here, you'll be made incredibly welcome. So please do come and see what we've got over here. Malcolm, any thoughts from you?
Yeah, I can't wait to meet you all. Yeah, no, it's some of my favourite places in the UK on this trip, and I've made some fantastic friends through NatHab on the way, and no, I'm really looking forward to going back out there.
Yeah, and we really appreciate everybody calling in and listening to our presentation for, I guess, for your afternoon. It's evening over here. Thank you for spending the last hour with us. I hope it's been fun and informative for you, and yeah, hopefully we'll get a chance to meet you in the flesh. Thank you very much.
My thanks as well. We did record today, so we will send that link out to everyone in just a few days, and we hope that this webinar has been inspiring, and as Stevie and Malcolm said, whether you're contemplating it or already planning to travel there this summer, we know that you will enjoy yourselves, and I know that you will be in good hands with these two gentlemen. So with that, we'll say good day and conclude our webinar. Goodbye, everybody.